Americans are losing their homes at an alarming rate. Nearly $2 trillion tax dollars have been shoveled into the hole that Wall Street dug. Wall Street took the risky debt, pressed it up as fancy securities, and sold it around the world as safe investment.
Stocks all around the world are tanking because of the crisis on Wall Street.
Americans have seen their investment shrink and their property values plummet.
When those banks fell flat on their faces, they got up, dusted themselves off with a $700 billion check from the government. Homeowners, on the other hand, $745 billion in the hole.
Homeowners are facing a disturbing problem. They can afford to pay their mortgage each month, but their property is worth less than what they owe.
The housing bubble of 2008 has many similarities to an event that happened 82 years ago, when the stock market crashed on October 24, 1929. Many Americans soon after lost their jobs, homes, and everything they owned. America was in dire pain, with a president who would not give relief to those in distress. By 1932, unemployment was at 25% and was on the verge of growing. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a former vice presidential candidate and popular New York governor, announced his run for president and ultimately won the Democratic Party's nomination. During the presidential race, FDR ran on what he called a New Deal for the American people. On Election Day, he won 57% of the popular vote and 472 electoral votes, defeating current President Herbert Hoover by a landslide. In March of 1933, at his inaugural ceremony, Roosevelt said,
"Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is..."
By suggesting to the American people there was nothing to fear but fear itself, he was referring to the New Deal, of which he promised on the campaign. During Roosevelt's first 100 days, Congress passed relief and reform programs. Such programs as Social Security allowed seniors to have a pension while in a bad economy, even though in modern-day America, people pay into Social Security and then get it at age 65. The Public Works Administration put people to work by building schools, highways, and hospitals, while the Civilian Conservation Corps put young men ages 18 to 25 to work in the U.S. forest system by constructing more than 800 parks and reforesting America's forests. Meanwhile, on the financial front, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation insured bank deposits and even supervised state banks. Although many programs were starting to come into place, FDR and his administration were under fire from both the left and the right. Conservative Democrats and conservative Republicans formed the American Liberty League to stop the New Deal. Also, former President Hoover supported the League in stopping further New Deal legislation that was seen in their eyes as unconstitutional. On the left side of the political spectrum was former Louisiana Governor and newly elected U.S. Senator Huey Long. Long thought the New Deal should have went further by taxing the wealthy and giving that wealth to the unemployed and the needy. Alongside Senator Long was Joseph Kennedy Sr., a wealthy businessman and the Securities and Exchange Commission's chairman, who urged Roosevelt to tax the top-earning bracket. Even though FDR had these influences around him, he kept fighting for his vision on how to improve America in a time of pain. Even though several New Deal programs were in place, like the Agricultural Adjustment Act to lower farm production, or the Tennessee Valley Authority to help the people of Tennessee and Kentucky get electricity, the president still had to sell his plan to the American people. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was his greatest communicator to African Americans and women. First Lady Roosevelt urged her husband to appoint Frances Perkins as the first female Secretary of Labor. That he later did. Also, President Roosevelt made appointments of African Americans to his cabinet, such as Assistant Chief of Staff Mary McLeod Bethune. FDR, though, went through a rough patch of controversy with the New Deal. One of the New Deal controversies was over the National Industrial Recovery Act. This act would regulate industry and permit competing companies. This act was soon found to be unconstitutional in the U.S. Supreme Court case of Schuster's Poultry Court versus the United States. Then 6 months later, President Roosevelt wanted to change the makeup of the Supreme Court by increasing the number of justices so that further New Deal legislation would not be struck unconstitutional. This court packing plan, as it was called by the press, was FDR's scandal, his Achilles heel. Republican governor of Kansas and 1936 presidential candidate Alf Landon criticized the court packing plan by calling it a scheme. Ultimately, the court packing plan was defeated on the Senate floor. Towards the end of FDR's New Dealing, the country entered deficit spending to afford the plan. 19 programs were put in place to help the American people by giving them employment. The New Deal had a lasting effect on American society. When the housing bubble crashed in 2008 and unemployment was rising, a few New Deal programs helped the most in pain. Social Security helped seniors who lost their homes stay a little bit above water in a bad economy, while the National Labor Relations Board that was created under FDR sought to talk to companies about not laying off workers. So even today, we see the positive effects of the New Deal.